Hello, welcome to this talk called New Perspectives in English Language Teaching, Opportunities and Reconfigurations. I would like to thank Santo Tomas University for the invite to be part in this lovely event and to be sharing my thoughts with you all. In this talk, I will be briefly touching on a few topics around one main theme, which is social justice, as one perspective that has become increasingly demanding increasingly necessary, if you will, in ELT. So I'll be looking at social justice, participation, localization, inclusion, diversity, languaging, and based on these 6 topics, I'll be looking at implications, conclusions, and ways in which we could get together to disseminate our stories. So, to start off with, social justice is an umbrella term to cover different ways and different reconfigurations of our own practice. And social justice, as you can see there on the screen, seeks to promote equality, diversity, inclusion, and equitable access to resources and social participation. And I should stress that social justice is not a language teaching approach or a method. It is much broader than that. It is a philosophy of education. It is a way of conceiving education, both formal and informal. And it is, the basic premise is that social justice means education for all. And in social justice, of course, one important element is participation. And participation, of course, leads to democracy, or there could be synonyms to some extent, of course. And how do we put this into practice? So what new perspectives do we have? Well, first of all, we want to ensure, or we want to empower teachers and students to have a stronger say in curriculum development and evaluation. So this is, in practice, this could be achieved by asking learners, for example, what topics they would like to learn English through, what areas of English language learning they may want to practice more, apart from, of course, our own agenda and the needs we have identified, what kind of materials, what kind of activities they would like to address, what kind of feedback they would like to have that proves more meaningful to them. And by the same token, teachers need to be part of institutional decisions. For example, coursebook choice, the adoption of a particular strategy for teaching, because what we need to ensure is that teachers' experience and practices are considered by the institutions in which they work. Of course, they need to be and they should be recognized, because they are the ones who, when there is curriculum renewal or curriculum change rests on teachers' shoulders. So, of course, it's fair for them to have their voice in whatever changes will be implemented. Now, through participation, necessarily we will be venturing into localization. And what do we mean by localization? Well, we mean going from the global to the local, or we could navigate these 2 dimensions, the localization of English language teaching. But how to achieve this? Well, one way of responding to this challenge is by contextualizing our pedagogies. So this is what we call context-responsive pedagogies. So they respond to our own cultures, they respond to our own learners, they respond to the affordances and lacks we may experience. So it's not just a matter of importing approaches or methods from elsewhere as they are. We could, of course, but then we would give them add on flavor, add on local touch. And at some point, we will have developed our own ways of teaching a foreign language or an additional language or English as an international language. And as we engage ourselves in culturally sustaining, culturally responsive and context responsive pedagogies, we could become part of a matrix where we produce our own resources. So teachers as material producers, but also learners as producers of resources that they can use themselves, but then they can share with other students. For example, they could write stories and we could put them together in a book, or illustrations or small activities that they could swap with other groups, other peers that have to do with, if they do a reading or writing task, maybe something related to their own interests, a local character, someone from important to them within the continent, within the interests they have. And another way of localizing the curriculum is by linking it to the school curriculum, so that the topics through which we teach English come from the curriculum, because these are topics that are meaningful, that are relevant, that are pertinent, and that students are aware of already. And one approach to do this is what we call CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. And this approach has been in the context of South America for quite a few years now, and it has developed its own color, its own tastes. And Colombia is a champion of CLIL, if you will, across different educational settings and levels. And soon there will be this volume coming out, International Perspectives on CLIL, and actually there will be a chapter from by a Colombian colleague telling us about his experience with doing CLIL with secondary school learners. As we localize and as we engage in social justice, of course, we need to think about inclusion and diversity. Inclusion is broader than diversity, or diversity may lead, at the end of the day, to inclusion. Inclusion is a process that helps overcome barriers limiting the presence, participation, and achievement of learners. Inclusion seeks to remove the barriers limiting the participation and achievement of all learners, respect diverse needs, abilities, and characteristics, and eliminate all forms of discrimination in the learning environment. What happens, again, from a social justice perspective is that when we engage in inclusion, first of all, we need to recognize those barriers that cause discrimination, inequality, inequity. So first of all, we need to acknowledge that we have a problem, or we need to acknowledge what the problems are, where the problems are, so that we address them and we dismantle inequality. If we go within inclusion, then diversity, and this comes from a volume that, again, will be coming out soon, that I have edited with two other colleagues from Argentina. And we view diversity within inclusive education to accommodate cultural practices, gender, and special education needs in English language teaching as topics of discussion and, more importantly, as curriculum enactment. Excuse me. So what happens with inclusion and diversity is that not only do we refer to special education needs, but we also need to guarantee the inclusion, the fair inclusion and the fair representation and addressing of different cultures, different backgrounds, languages, gender orientation, ethnicity or race, class. And we need to talk about these issues. But again, this doesn't mean asking learners, putting them in groups, and we give one topic to each group, and that's fine, but that would be tokenism to some extent. So we need to make sure, or we need to find ways, little by little, of transforming our teaching so that inclusion or inclusive education is a perspective that cuts across the curriculum, cuts across our teaching. So we can do this by addressing these topics explicitly, but also by providing opportunities for all, by being inclusive of feedback, by being inclusive of the materials we use and how we address learners, the hidden curriculum, if you will. And at least one way of doing this in the case of being inclusive of cultural practices and interculturality is by talking about languaging. And within languaging, there is language as action, as performance. There's this very useful concept, which is not entirely new, of course, which is called translanguaging. And translanguaging, as you can see there on the screen, is the use of all linguistic tools at one's disposal across languages to communicate and learn. So even though, of course, our focus is on English, we want to allow learners to use other languages like their repertoire to make meaning. This doesn't mean translation, right? There is intentionality behind this. So we will be allowing learners to maybe switch from one language to another so that they could mean and they could negotiate meaning with their peers, with ourselves. And that's one way of being mindful of reality, because this is what happens behind diversity and inclusion. We are accepting reality. We're not imposing any ideological contours. We are recognizing the complex, diverse, heterogeneous landscape that learners inhabit, whether we like it or not. I mean, that's the world. The world is, of course, extremely diverse, and I love that personally. So, with all these topics in mind, how do you see yourself navigating these avenues, these territories, this new map, where topics are not, of course, new, but their presence in English language teaching might, because, of course, it brings about changes, it brings about new challenges. What benefits do you see yourself? What challenges do you think you might encounter in your own practice, at the places where you work? And I thought that in terms of benefits, we, through social justice, we start to situate our practices. That is, we are teaching from and for our learners and with them and our peers. So there is a strong local flavor without, of course, ignoring the global landscape. But we want to adapt and reconfigure our teaching for our very own learners in their contexts. There will be a stronger element of intercultural citizenship. And culture here covers almost everything, all social practice. So this got to do with being respectful, being mindful, being aware of the impact we have, the trace we leave, and that's got to do with social and ecological citizenship, for example, and being aware of our presence in the planet. And alongside the teaching of English, we will be, by looking at all these other dimensions, we will be encouraging, we will be honing students' critical thinking skills for them to become critical, intercultural citizens who celebrate and work for inclusion. Of course, benefits come with challenges. One could be a very practical one, let's say, which is like leaving our comfort zone, because of course this entails changing some aspects of our teaching. So if we have been doing the same thing for years, well, this could be the time to make a change, to become adventurous, perhaps. But perhaps we want to become adventurous, but we don't find support for it. Or we want to see results now. We want to make big changes all together at the same time. And this could be frustrating. And a major challenge is, of course, lack of time. I've just realized that I say, of course, a lot of times. And preparation. But we don't need to know it all. We just need to be willing to make changes and to ask for help and to get together with a colleague or two and to see what other people have done. So, to finish off, I would like to encourage you to do what you can. You don't need to go grand. Do what you can with what you can and in the time you have. Look around, that is to say, take a look at what learners are bringing, what your colleagues are doing, what other people, for example, other colleagues are sharing on social platforms, Instagram, Facebook. Maybe you are in all these different Facebook groups and there's someone sharing an idea and you say, oh, I like that. So you make a change, you adapt it. And above all, I would say, let's start small. We don't need to change the world altogether at the same time. But if we take small steps, but we are systematic about them, so one step at a time, by the end of the school year, I will be in a very different place with my learners. So what matters here is the journey, the trajectory that we create with every step we take. If you have a story to tell me, or if you have a question, or if you have an experience that you'd like to share with me about the topics that we have covered in this brief talk, just get in touch, send me an email, find me on ResearchGate or on Twitter, and I'll be delighted to follow up on what you have to share with me. Thanks again. Thank you, Universidad Santo Tomás. Thank you for having me here, and thank you, University of Strathclyde, for supporting my work. Goodbye. Muchas gracias.